Here we go. All right. Well, good afternoon, everybody. This is Patrick from the Poison Pen Bookstore in Scottsdale, Arizona. And we are delighted to have with us Marie Benedict. She's going to be talking about her brand new book, The Queens of Crime. And Marie has signed a batch of books for us. And I'll go ahead and put a link in the comments field if you'd like to purchase one of these signed copies.
Yeah.
And each one of them will come with this awesome cocktail recipe for the bee's knees, which I'm sure you guys will go into in detail here.
I
So,
am told that the cocktail is delicious, and I'm only sorry that I forgot to bring a recipe card home to try it.
It is. I have to confess that during a launch event, a local restaurateur was kind enough to bring a huge carafe of it.
Wonderful.
And I would say that it was gone in like a half an hour, and we had to stop people from coming back for seconds. I didn't want tipsy audience members. So it is delicious, and it was a
they,
favorite.
they weren't virgin bee's knees.
Oh, no. Although there is an option for that. The ladies in question, the five queens of crime, would not have been drinking virgin bee's knees for sure.
No, they were actually pretty serious, pretty serious drinkers. It's kind of a British thing there. So I was telling Marie before we started, thank you, Patrick, very much. And indeed, this is my advanced reading copy. And I've been lucky enough to go to be a guest at the Detection Club. I can't actually be invited to join it. And you do have to be invited to join it. It's a social club. It is not a business club like the Mystery Writers of America or the British Crime Writers Association.
That's
It
right.
started as a social club, and Dorothy Sayers and Agatha Christie were among the founders of it. And Bernice Orksey, which I did not realize until I just looked something up, and G.K. Chesterton was the
Yep.
first president, and then it became E.C. Bentley, and then it became Sayers, and then it became Christie, who had to have a stand-in because she was so shy by the time that happened. She
That's
didn't feel that she could address the meeting.
That's
And
right.
then it moved on to, I'm trying to think, there was somebody before H.R.F. Keating, whom I knew really well, and then it became Simon Brett, and now it's Martin Edwards. So there's
I
been
mean, you are unbelievable, I have to say. Most readers, most Americans really haven't ever heard of the Detection Club. And you not only know what it is, know the players, know the leaders, but have met them and attended meetings. I mean, that is like pinch me.
I know, it was so lucky. I went to Ellis Peters and I had become friends, and I went to her Diamond Dagger Award. Gosh, I can't remember how long ago it was. Must have been in the very early aughts. And Peter Lovesey, a very wonderful crime writer and a dear friend, invited me to a meeting which coincided with the Diamond Dagger Award presented in London. So that was my first time. And then I was invited to Simon Brett's inaugural, where, and Marie, you can describe it because you read about it, where they have the whole thing with the skull and the oath. And then I can actually read it. I found it on my phone.
I
Um,
hope I got it. I hope I did it justice. I mean, you alone know.
I really do. But my favorite part, well, there were two things that I think are really fun, and then we'll talk about you instead of me.
Oh,
One was at the Simon Bread dinner at some point, as one does, I wandered off. It was at the Savoy, and the women's room at the Savoy, it was at that time very pink and very kind of, it still looked very 1930s. So in I went, and there sat P.D. James looking bored. And I said, "Hi, Phyllis." And because I knew her, I'd had dinner with her at Harry Keating's and all, and she said to me, "Why don't we just sit and talk for a while?" She said, "and then we don't have to go out." And so I can still remember there sitting on the steps, because there's like two levels, sitting on the steps with her in a chair and having this long conversation with P.D. James. And it was almost impossible to ever get Phyllis on her own, you know. Um, oh,
that
thank
is
you,
like, I
Patrick.
mean, that is the stuff of my dreams, what you're describing right there.
It was wonderful. Patrick has just let me know that my first time going was in 1993, because that's when Ellis Peter won. Patrick uses the chat function to kind of keep me up to speed, which I
I
truly love.
love it.
But the best part, and the part I've always remembered, is that Harry Keating and his wife Sheila, who lived in London, they were friends. And at one point when I was in London, they invited me to spend a day or two with them. And they had one of those townhouses, that go up and down. And so the guest bedroom was up on the top floor. And so all unknowingly, I went up there with my little suitcase. And as I turned around to sort of unpack and get ready for bed, I realized that the whole Detection Club library was right there. So
Are you
instead of,
serious?
I am. And so I sat up all night reading an autographed copy of Gaudi Night.
Oh my
I
gosh.
know. And when I went down to breakfast the next morning, with Circle and all, I said to them, I was leaving that day. I said, Harry, are you going to frisk me when I leave? you know,
My suitcase is full.
oh, it was, and sadly, as I understand it from Martin, or maybe it was Simon, the club eventually sold most of the library for operating funds. And it was really a spectacular library, but it was all upstairs in the upper bedroom at the Keatings. I mean, that's how I love the British, that they do things like that, right?
Casual, sort of eccentric offhand. It's not too precious. Absolutely love that. I
Yeah.
can't believe you were sitting there unknowingly, initially, amidst the library of the Detection Club with, I mean, there must have been, I mean, such treasures around
Absolutely.
you.
Well, I saw Gaudy Night, which is my favorite Sayers, and generally I thought of her masterpiece. And I didn't really think about what I was looking at until I pulled it off the shelf. And then I opened it and I saw it was an autographed copy, and I thought, whoa. So then I pulled some other books off shelves, and then it occurred to me that it must be, in fact, the library. And I guess maybe it moved from president to president or something, or maybe just whoever had house room for it.
Did they not have at that time like a central location for the
No, 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 no. It's always been well, the members are from all over. And so at least the meetings I went to, they all assembled in London
Okay.
for, like a social thing. Usually it was dinner. Sometimes with Peter, it was lunch. And they may have, at least for the one in 1993, I think they pulled it together because of Ellis Peters and the Diamond Dagger. People were coming
Mm.
anyway. And so
Okay.
they could
It
do
makes
lunch,
sense.
and then her Diamond Dagger thing was an evening affair. That's another fabulous story. She invited me to go to meet her at her hotel to have a glass of champagne before the Diamond Dagger. And it turned out the glass of champagne was a Jeroboam. We were so drunk that
What is that? What's a Jerab? What is that?
it's like a bigger than a Magnum sort of thing. Somebody,
Oh my gosh.
and she was a little tiny person. I'm a little tiny person, but she's even tinier than I am. And the two of us were so drunk that when I went out to get a taxi, the bellman at the hotel, kind of tucked me into the taxi and rolled the windows
Take care
down.
of this one.
Okay, I mean, I am not a drinker, so it's just like a horrible experience in one way. But I have to say that getting drunk with Ellis Peters at her Diamond
Ah,
Dagger might
me.
be the most interesting thing I've ever done as far as this whole career goes.
I don't know. In my mind, chatting with PD James on the women's room bathroom steps is pretty cool too, though. I
It
mean,
was awesome. Oh,
that that's pretty much up there, I would
no,
say.
no, it's
What a ride. I mean, I feel like you were transported directly into the world that I write about that I would love to be transported into. That
well,
is
the thing is, I'm older than you are. You didn't start in time to do all that. I could, well, and another story, I could tell you how I danced with David Suchet at Agatha Christie's 100th birthday party. But let's move on and talk about your book, not me
so you're just
anymore.
gonna brush that off. Hello.
I'm going to brush it off. So, The Queens of Crime is a really nifty concept, and I am a big admirer of Marie's writing about women who I think, maybe deserve a bigger place or a better story in history than they have had. So, the Mitford Affair we have talked about, Her
Yeah.
Hidden Genius, which I think is one of your best and most important books,
Oh,
because the
thank
Watson Crick thing was, I
oh,
think really hard for her. You
sure.
know, Lady Clementine, the only woman in the room, the other Einstein. And then, of course, you wrote a book about J.P. Morgan's wonderful librarian, The Personal Librarian, which was sorry, I can't read anymore, Morning America book club pick and a Target Book of the Year. And you
Mhm.
wrote that with another author
Yeah.
for reasons we don't need to go into. But
Yeah.
anyway, and so, Belle DeCosta Green was a really fabulous person. And all of these women deserve stories that, that you have written. So you're a lawyer, right, originally?
Oh, yeah. Yes, for way too
What
long.
got you interested? Well, yes, I know it's either right. What is it that one lawyer author I used to know? She used to had a sign over her desk, publish or practice.
Oh,
Those were her two choices, and I know it applies. I mean, I'm a lawyer
oh,
who's a
it does.
bookseller, and you're a lawyer who's an
Yeah.
author. Much better life, right?
Oh, no, I mean, can't even compare the two. I mean, for me, for somebody else, I actually, a very dear friend, I worked at large New York City law firms for a long time. And one of my friends who stayed and actually now is the managing partner of that large law firm, she hosted an event for me in New York just a couple days ago. And it was like stepping back into my old life for a few minutes. A couple people had stayed. It reminded me that there are people that do love being a lawyer. That person was just never me, that just, and it brought it all back. I hadn't been in that kind of environment for a long time. And so, yes, reaffirming my life choice for sure.
I probably would have done better. In fact, several lawyers said that to me. I would have been better as a teacher, a law professor than a practicing attorney.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't mind the study of law. I felt like law didn't really prepare you, for me anyway, what it was like to actually practice law. Like I enjoyed the study of law. So I think you're right. I think like you, I might have enjoyed being a professor or an instructor, but not the practice.
I
No.
can remember a very distinguished lawyer back east where I was said to me one day, he said, you're good, but you're never going to be great. And I thought that was interesting. So I said, hmm. And he said, you're not in love with the law.
And
And he was
that's
so right,
so,
and I had to acknowledge the truth of that,
yeah.
Marie.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely true. And that's how I mean, I was good at what I did, but I would never have been able to stay the distance and really been great because I didn't love it. I didn't love, from a litigation standpoint, I didn't love all that unnecessary contentiousness, the posturing. I felt like, why can't we just resolve this? I mean, usually there's an easy resolution that doesn't always involve, at least to the kind of matters that I was
Well,
dealing with.
that's very true. But of course, in so much litigation, especially in defense work, whoever tells the best story gets to win because juries do not necessarily decide on the basis of logic. And
No.
I know a lot of wonderful stories about, lawyers and how they manage to get unlikely verdicts with great stories. But
Well,
uh,
I would say it was good practice for writing fiction, you know,
yes,
and
exactly.
certainly good practice for the kind of fiction that I write. The way I look at it is, the work I did before was a deep dive into the research, whether it was the law or the facts, cobbling it together to make a persuasive narrative on behalf of my client. Now my research is into these historical women. Instead of writing a brief, I'm writing a story, but it's still a narrative, right?
Mhm.
It's still a story on behalf of someone. And my client is the woman that I choose to write about. There's a
Yeah.
lot about that prior work that I did, a lot about the skills I learned, and certainly the attention to detail and that sense of, as you know, never letting a stone go unturned. I mean, you just don't. And that has stayed with me and served me well in this career.
Well, you definitely have to have terrific research skills and the patience to do it. And,
Yeah,
lawyers are also pretty good at self-editing,
that's
or being edited. So,
yeah.
Michael Conley and I have talked about that a lot. He's in favor of being a reporter before you be a writer. And I think that
Mhm.
lawyers make Scott Turow and I, we practically grew up together. I'm 5 years
I didn't
older.
know that.
Yeah, no, we both grew up in Winnetka. We both went to New Trier High School. Then we both
Oh,
went to Stanford. And then he went to Harvard Law. And I was told when I was graduating from Stanford that I didn't want to go into law because back then in 1960, women were pretty much sidelined into family law or, child custody stuff. And I thought, I don't want to do that. So
yeah.
instead, I became a librarian and, went to the Library of Congress, whatever. And then later went to law. So, we diverged, but it's been interesting to see how I loved 1L. It's my absolute favorite Scott Turow book to this very day, what it
Mhm.
was like to go to Harvard Law School. And I've congratulated myself for years that I didn't do it.
That was a great, I mean, I remember reading that book as like, it was like lifting up the curtain to see what it was really like. And there
Mhm.
wasn't a lot of that at that time. That was very new for people to understand what the process was like and the competitiveness. And I mean, and that's another aspect of it that, I didn't thrill to, let's put it that way. But I'm more of a collaborator than a competitor. But it is funny the way that life brings you full circle, isn't it? You both kind of came back together.
Well, and for writers, nothing's ever wasted. All of your life experiences you can draw upon to write your books. So, what interested you? You've written some American, you've written some, you're not confined to any one nationality. What
Yeah.
drew you to this particular story? Because there are five women involved in this story.
Yeah. I mean, I think I grew up on this kind of golden age of detective fiction. Um, I've talked before about how I grew up with an amazing aunt. My aunt was an English professor. She was a poet and she was a rebellious nun. She really was.
Really?
And oh yeah, absolutely. And I was the oldest of six kids and I was a crazy voracious reader. I never wanted to be a writer. I just loved to read. And I was precocious and it was hard to find stuff for me to read. And my aunt kind of took that task on. And so she introduced me to stuff at a very young age that like most of my peers were not reading, or if ever, right? Like Toni Morrison, long before anybody was reading Toni Morrison. But also she's the one who put in my hands The Mists of Avalon,
Oh,
which
yeah, Marion Zimmer Bradley, right? Oh, awesome.
yeah, I mean, she's really, but looking back in the course of my life, and this is like, if you're lucky enough to have in your life the person who puts, as you probably have many times, the right book in a person's hand at the right time in their life, it can transform them. And that Mists of Avalon, it blew my mind for people who haven't read it. It's a female-centric telling of the Arthurian legend. And there really wasn't anything like it out there, at least that I was aware of. And it just opened my eyes to all these hidden corners of history and women's voices. And I really became fascinated with that. And what she also put in my hands a lot, it's intermixed with all this other stuff, was all these mysteries. She loved Agatha Christie. She loved P.D. James. I mean, she loved the genre as a whole, but she always gifted me or, loaned me some of her collection. And so I read at a young age Dorothy Sayers, which most people had never heard of. Agatha Christie people had heard of, right? And so there was a smattering of some of these other well-known golden age of detective fiction writers. And I just grew to love both these tricky puzzles. Like I loved that. And I loved the time period. I didn't know why I loved it at the time. Most of these classic books are sort of interwar period, not exclusively, but kind of that post World War I, pre World War II. And there was just something about that time period. And I don't know if it's that I sensed there was so much happening, and yet some things were very calm and controlled. But I think looking back on it, what I loved was the intellectual puzzle. I
Mhm.
loved all the hidden layers of the characters. I mean, people think that these stories are one-dimensional, but they are not. These writers have so much subtext and story going on here. And then I loved, and I think this is one reason why a lot of people love mysteries, but the disordered world set right, you know, and the fact that that is possible. So all of those things really made me have made me a lifelong lover of mysteries and a particular with a particular adoration of these original writers. So I'd say I came by these women honestly for a long, long time.
So, who are the five women?
The five women are, of course, Agatha Christie. Everybody knows. I don't think I need to introduce her. Dorothy Sayers, more people should know her, I
Mhm.
feel. I felt for a while that of all of them, she's one that's really ripe for rediscovery. She wrote these Lord Peter Wimsey novels with the occasional sidekick of Harriet Vane, who then becomes, of course, much more than a sidekick. And I love Harriet for so many reasons, but now I love her especially because I think she's actually Dorothy Sayers. I think she's a stand-in for Dorothy. Um, and rereading, as I was lucky enough to do for my research, all of Dorothy's books, in particular, with a particular focus on the Harriet Vane books, the issues that she's talking about in these books are so modern. I mean, they're so unresolved today, issues about work-life balance and equitable marriages and, women's position in society. And she's using these books in one part, not wholly for sure, but in one part as really a vehicle to kind of explore the things that she was concerned with, that she was thinking about. And so they're very much ahead of their time. And so that was really that, and a couple other reasons were why I chose her as my main character. She's the primary narrator. The other three women are so fabulous. I mean, each one is so different, but so fabulous. Nio Marsh, who we were just talking about, she was a New Zealander. She was probably first and foremost a theater person, a director, loved the theater, was super involved, and actually really primarily, I think, is maybe more known for the way in which she really established theater in New Zealand. But she was a writer of very successful mystery series as well. She had, it seems to me, from what I've read, just a fantastically bold personality, which I absolutely just adored. Baroness Emma Orczy is another one of my women. She was a Hungarian aristocrat. She was speaking of big personalities, I mean, this dramatic, romantic nature, everything was looked at through rose-colored glasses. And she's best known, I think, for the Scarlet Pimpernel character and, movies, books, plays, really the original dual identity hero. When you think about all these modern day superhero movies, I mean, her Scarlet Pimpernel was really the forerunner for all of those. But
Anthony was, yeah, no question about it. But she also wrote the Old Man in the Corner mysteries,
which I
um,
love.
yeah, I don't know. I always sort of think of one of the Gabor sisters when I think about Baroness Orczy. It's just
It's funny you say that. I do too. I think of the accent.
yeah.
I think of the very romantic presentation. She always had a fur draped around her and draped with pearls and everything. Her husband was the most romantic man that ever lived. And she led this gilded existence. And of course, that can't really be possible. But that was the way she saw the world. And she was a fantastic figure. And older, one of the things I loved writing about these women was that their friendship was intergenerational.
Mhm.
It wasn't, they spanned from the 20s into the 70s in age. They're coming from three of them, including Marjorie Allingham, who wrote the Campion novels, who I haven't mentioned, she was the youngest of the bunch.
Right.
Not by a ton, but definitely the youngest. So you have women from different continents, different countries, different ages. In some sense, different social strata, which was pretty uncommon for the time. In England, people, particularly then, really kind of stayed within the
They
strata.
did. They stayed within. It's a very stratified society. Is Sayers the only one? Sayers was one of the very first women admitted to Oxford ever.
She was
Um,
one of the very first to get a degree. Yeah, women were admitted, but weren't allowed to get degrees.
exactly. But
She
did
was one
any
of
of the other ones go to any kind of, I think she was the only one, right?
I mean,
But
their education was more, I don't want to say completely halted after what we would consider to be high school, but education was not always very formal, right? There was a lot of tutoring that happening, a lot of, for women in this time period, learning from a parent, like Marjorie Allingham's parents were both writers, editors and writers. But no, none of the other women had any formal post-secondary education other than Dorothy Sayers. So the nature of their interaction was another reason that really drew me, in addition to just loving this time period and loving these women's stories, that really drew me to tell their story. I couldn't help but wonder what it would have been like to be a fly in the wall on one of their get-togethers, right? And, I will say, I do create fiction, which I think I've told you. The Detection Club was not at all, from what I understand, objecting to the presence of women. There were
actually, there were women that founded it, Sayers,
yeah.
and Orczy, and I think
And
Christie.
Agatha, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, they didn't have as many women in their ranks, but I think that's more of a function of the time. It was writing is and has always been a challenging profession. And, I think there were just fewer women writers than there were men. That wasn't something that they set out to do, but I needed a way to get these women together and set them out on their adventure. And having that common goal of proving themselves to the Detection Club was really my device. But I absolutely love the Detection Club in and of itself. I mean, talk about wanting to be a fly on the wall for something. I would love to have been a fly on the wall for their initiation ceremonies.
Amazing. I wish I could. Let me see if I can find it again while you talk, because The Guardian, the British newspaper, had
Mhm.
if I can find it again, they actually ran through the whole um, oath of office and all, which is hilarious.
Oh, it's I think something like, so for people who aren't familiar with it, the Detection Club was this social gathering and supportive, I think. It wasn't like a business club, but there was an element of the very best and brightest mystery writers gathering together. And they had this, in part formed by Dorothy Sayers herself, very elaborate initiation ceremony where
Yeah.
they would wear like these, and unbelievably, Barbara has been there for it. The elaborate dark like robes, the candles, and then they had to put their hand on this.
Eric the Skull. But do you know that
Eric,
they all called it Erica
I
because it was so
did.
determined? Yes.
I absolutely love that. I mean, I've seen pictures of it. It looks like a real human skull. I don't know if that in person, if it really has that look to it, but there's
Um,
a great picture of Dorothy with the skull that I love.
well, it's a skull, but they've now determined that it was probably a female. Let me see if did you look at all at Father Knox and his, 10 rules of fair play for
Oh,
writing?
absolutely.
So, that is part of what they did here. But let me see if I can find you the actual um
It's something like they have to swear that they will resolve their mystery.
Barbara, I just sent you a link, by the way,
oh,
Oh,
thank you,
in the
you're
Patrick.
chat.
so
Popped up
good.
again. All right. I'm gonna find it because I read it before we started all this. Right. I love Dorothy Sayers. According to this article in The Guardian, she assured a member who had become so drunk at a meeting one night that they couldn't remember anything about the night. You were completely normal after dinner, she said, and particularly helpful to charming Anthony Barclay's American guest, whom he so discourteously abandoned. I mean, gotta love that, right? It's so
Oh, I would have loved to have been there. I mean, the barbs, the commentary. I mean, these were such quick-witted people, um,
yes.
and brilliant to a person. I mean, every one of them was brilliant. And the twisty puzzles. I mean, I just can't even imagine. The thing I know with the fair play, so one of the things that Dorothy was interested in was, and I think a lot of them, there was some inconsistency in quality in
Yeah.
mystery novels at the time, and detective fiction, and they wanted to kind of help eliminate those, those mystery books where it's like you're plugging along, it's a great story, and then in the last 10 pages, a character emerges or uh,
Yes.
an artifact emerges that you could have never as a reader guessed at, and that's how the whole crime is solved. They wanted to make sure that all the clues were there for the smart, attentive reader,
Yeah.
kind of iron out some of that. And I think that the oath is that they promise to solve their novels without an act of God, coincidence, feminine intuition, um, divine intervention.
I've got it.
Oh, you have it.
I
Okay.
actually found it now. All right. Do you promise that your detectives shall well and truly detect the crimes presented to them using those wits which it may please you to bestow upon them, and not placing reliance on nor making use of divine revelation, feminine intuition, or it's jumbo pokery, whatever it all is.
Oh,
But
jiggery pokery.
jiggery pokery, that's it. But they also, the Father Knox had two rules that I've always thought were fair. No Chinaman, which was a racist statement at the point. But in other words, they didn't want you to bring in, some complete outsider. And then
Mhm.
and no doppelgangers. So, you
That's
couldn't use that device of having a twin. And
right.
that was the reason, that it all went that way. And so, I just think it was a good thing, you know, in lots of
Oh,
ways.
absolutely. I mean, from what I've been able to glean, I mean, they supported each other. They collaborated on all sorts of short story collections together.
Did, yeah, the Floating Admiral and like that.
Floating
It was, they were
Admiral.
fundraisers, and Martin still does those. So there are some
Definitely.
new ones. Right. Okay, I found the whole thing. The criminal must be someone mentioned early in the early part of the story, and not anyone whose thoughts the reader has been not been allowed to follow. All supernatural or preternatural agencies are ruled out. Not more than one secret room or passage is allowable. I love that. The locked room
I
mystery.
love that.
Yep. No hitherto undiscovered poisons may be used. In other words, you know, you couldn't just make up something that fell out of the Amazon. And of
Exactly.
course, you know, Christie and Ellis Peters both worked in pharmacology during the wars, so they were extremely good with that. Sayers, I don't know if you, I'm trying to remember the name of the book, but you know, she, in one of her books, it'll come to me, she they killed somebody with poison mushrooms. And she didn't know
Yes.
her mycology, and afterward discovered that, in point of fact, this poison, you know, couldn't be done, couldn't be used for the job. It
So
was
she
called
broke her own rules.
well, yeah, it was a strong poison. It was a different anyway, no accident must ever help the detective. No Chinaman must figure in the story. The detective himself must not commit the crime. And there was a really great book years ago written by an author in the Far West, Nora something or other. And in fact, the narrator, well, of course, it's Agatha Christie too, in a way, but the narrator turned out, the police chief turned out to be the criminal, which I thought
After
was
all.
great. The detective must not light on any clues which are not instantly produced for the inspection of the reader. The stupid friend of the detective, the Watson, must not conceal any thoughts which pass through his mind. His intelligence must be
Remember,
slightly, but very slightly below that of the average reader, which is sort of, you
I
know, a,
don't remember that one. That's
well,
awesome.
but that's, you know, that's really kind of a paradigm for, you know, if you have a genius detective,
Mhm.
then the reader really wouldn't be able to think like Sherlock Holmes or to follow him. So you need Watson.
Right, to relate to be your stand-in in the book.
Right.
I mean, everything you're describing are the elements of mystery today. You know what I mean? These people were creating in this detection club and in their work, they were creating the genre altogether.
Well, they were, and now as I understand it, you know, not only is the detection club relaxed slightly, but if you really think about so much of modern crime fiction, particularly, you know, the whole domestic, you know, thriller, the trust no one and all, some of these roles have been completely abandoned. And first, the first Charles Todd mystery, you know, the mother and son who wrote as Charles Todd. I was so loved Carolyn, who just broke my heart when she died prematurely. And Charles, I'm happy to say, is going to be publishing more Inspector Rutledge and
Oh, good.
with the Mysterious Press, which I'm glad about. But their first book, Patrick will have to tell me again what the title was. In fact, did that. It did have doppelganger. And
Seriously,
yeah, it did. That was the
I love
solution
it.
to the crime. And they did it deliberately.
As like a rule breaking,
Mhm.
as
Yeah.
in on the nose, we're going to do this and do it right.
Yep. So,
That's
I mean, I
kind of
think,
awesome.
but the thing is, if you don't know what all the rules were, and if
Right.
you know, if you're a mystery reader who is not grounded in the classics, then
Yeah.
you lose a little of the fun and the appreciation of reading modern treatments of it, where people are either embroidering on the genre or subverting the genre.
Right.
And you know, right at the moment, you
Poking
may
fun
not.
at it, you know? I
Oh,
mean,
yeah. But it's a form. I mean, all of a sudden, there are like 5 books out this year where the whole thing takes place on a remote island. You
oh,
know,
I
it's either,
noticed. I saw that,
I
which is,
know,
that's a Christie to a T right there.
totally. You
Mhm.
know, we have Alice Finney, we had Ruth Ware, we have Lisa Unger coming up. I just read somebody else, I can't think of who it is. And so, you know, it's like the basic Christie plot ideas just get, you know, but if you haven't ever read And Then
Right.
There Were None, then
They
you
seem
would miss
fresh to
just
you.
a little of the fun, right? Of seeing
I,
how a modern
I
person
think
is doing
so.
it.
I mean, because I mean, some of these storylines are so ingrained in us, we don't even know the origin. We don't even know where they originally came from. There have been so many iterations over time. And I think that's, another thing that really attracted me to writing about these women is to see some of where it all came from. It's a little bit hearkening back to what their legacy really is, which is multifold. I mean, but the very word or the phrase Agatha Christie is conjures up an entire universe, just her name, and these other women were part of it too. And yet they haven't had the same longevity and name recognition as Agatha, even though some of them, people might know their characters because they've been adapted on PBS or BBC. I mean, there've been Campions and Allens. There's even been some of Whimsy's adaptations over time. And then, as you said, like those stories influence or inspire other stories. And it's fun to like trace almost the lineage of that and see where some of these germs of brilliance really start with. And I just love the idea of people rediscovering some of these women, whether it's their person, their lives or their stories. I mean, not all of them stand the test of time quite beautifully, and sometimes you'll be in a particular story and you'll think, oh, but for the most part, like I listened to Dorothy Sayers, The Busman's Holiday or Busman's Honeymoon,
Yeah.
which is the last of the Peter Wimsey, Harriet Vane books. And I was laughing out loud at the banter. It starts out as kind of a recap of their societal commentaries as well that are hysterical as well. So there's just so much to unpack and so much to these women's legacies that I feel like really has kind of gotten lost. They're kind of all lumped. And I love Agatha, don't get me wrong, but they're kind of all lumped under Agatha.
Well, they are. I mean, Nile Marsh was. Do you remember the Nile Marsh where I'm trying to? It's a complicated story, but there's a guy that lives up in a tree. Remember, it's the one about all the crossword puzzles, and
Yes.
one of the more eccentric. Because she was very good about the completely eccentric
Yeah.
British households, and I still remember that one of the men in the household would be found up a tree. But they were really good at doing British crossword puzzles, which are a bitch. They are much harder than the New York Times
America.
crossword
Yeah.
puzzle. Yeah, they really are. And Marjorie Allingham had a genius for the Gothic or the kind of macabre. Again, I probably don't remember the title, but she had a whole book which led up to there was like a haunting at a
Oh, I know the one you mean.
remember the one with the tower?
I'm
And
not going to
the entire book, you are waiting to see what lives in the tower.
the tower.
So when you got there, it worked. I mean,
Right.
most of the time when you get to that point, the story is just a huge letdown or something.
Right.
But it was absolutely perfect. And she loved those really weird plots. Remember the one with the two brothers and whatever, and there was a weird suicide, only it was disguised to be that one killed the other, but it turned out that it was an intentional.
Oh, I know the one you mean.
Yeah, on the bridge, using clock weights and all that. But I mean, so she was great. She actually still, there is a Marjorie Allingham short story award every year with the British Crime Writers
I read
Association.
about that.
Yeah, and I don't know if her estate or her publisher, her husband outlived her, Carter Youngman.
Yeah.
And I don't know if the royalties from her books, are there to fund but I just got a notice from the Crime Writers Association that the Marjorie Allingham short story competition is open again. But in many ways, Niall Marsh, the one about Rome, remember, what is it called? They came to Rome or something. Anyway,
Remember that one.
Artist in Crime is the one where he meets his version. Inspector Roderick Allen meets his
Love
Harriet
that
Vane.
one. Yes, I love that.
Called Artists in Crime. Niall Marsh has such a sense of humor, and as you say, a great sense of theater. But
Oh,
what we haven't talked about while we're wandering around here is what actually do these women do in the book? I keep forgetting.
yeah.
There is a crime plot in this book.
There is. I mean, I felt like as I was thinking about these women, like, how can I not like do some sort of homage to their own genre as I explore them? So when I found out that Dorothy Sayers had actually investigated a real life murder, that was it for me. I mean, that was absolutely it. You know, she was married to a reporter whose beats were crime and car racing. I won't ask the connection between the two, but that's what they were. And he was actually asked to cover the disappearance of this young English nurse, May Daniels. And it was a huge kind of two-tiered paparazzi event because the girl disappeared in circumstances that honestly seemed torn from the pages of one of the women's novels. I mean, the girl is on a day trip. She's a nurse. She's on a day trip. They get very few days off with her fellow nurse, Celia McCarthy. They decide to take a ferry, do a day trip to Boulogne, have a little adventure. They roam around. It's a very picturesque town. And right before they're about to get on the ferry back home, they step into a restroom at the dock. It's a restroom with one entrance only, no exit. Inside, there's no vents, there's no windows, there's nothing. Celia waits for May outside the door and waits and waits, and May never comes out. She vanishes into thin air. And of course, when that happened, the press went completely bananas because there was no resolution. It seemed like poof, magic. And then the press coverage kind of died down because she was not, it was months and she wasn't found. There didn't seem to be any leads. And then her body was found in the woods, not too far from where the dock was. And the press resurgence started again. And that's where Dorothy's husband got involved with this request from his newspaper, The News of the World. Dorothy had the brainstorm that she should write a companion piece. He would report on the crime and they would do their own investigation. He would do it from the perspective of a crime journalist and she would do it from a crime fiction writer. And his editor loved the idea. And so the two of them kind of descended on this madhouse of Boulogne where tons of reporters, everyone's looking for a scoop. And it was at that moment that I was like, oh, this is it. What if I had her friends come along? What if the four other queens of crime joined her in this investigation? And I just, that's where the story kind of, really took on a life of its own. And, I like my research. So I spent a lot of time. From my perspective, it was like a gift. There were hundreds of newspaper articles about it. I mean, and really in two tranches, right? When she vanished and when her body was found, because it was a source of fascination. And wow, the amount of detail about her life, the theories, the murder, the things that happened, the town. And so I have the women set off, and it becomes really a quest for justice more than anything, because, and this is all true. This is not the women going with her, but what happened in the case. The authorities kind of abandoned it. Both the French and the English authorities were involved. And all of these sort of very negative connotations about May Daniels started to surface. She had bobbed hair, so she must be a loose woman. A traditional girl would have long hair and tie it up. But if you had bobbed hair, you probably had some really modern views. And well, maybe you did something to prompt this violence done upon you, right? And so you start to see embedded in all of these articles, all these societal views about her as a young woman. And one of which is really fleshed out in Dorothy's books, is about her being a surplus woman, which is this this category of single working women in Great Britain in this interwar time period. The prevailing view was that women should be at home with their families and husbands. And so these women were kind of reviled for being unmarried and working. Never mind that there were hardly any men to marry because of World War I and the population. And they had to support themselves. It kind of didn't matter. And so she was kind of lumped in with this group, and it gave the authorities an excuse to kind of just rely on preconceptions and walk away from a real resolution to her murder. So what I did was I had the women come together and solve her murder. And the way I tried to do it was really to follow Dorothy, because she left behind in her books a lot of clues about, I think, what she thought happened.
Okay.
So in the book Unnatural Death, if you remember that one, she has a scene that is exactly like the May Daniels, Celia McCarthy scene where May goes missing in a restroom, and she posits her resolution. And there's all these little like things sprinkled throughout. One I love is she starts to have in her books Lord Peter Wimsey rely on this Bureau of Women.
Right.
Right? And those are all surplus women. They're single,
Yeah.
unmarried women that they place as nurses and secretaries and governesses into these these crime scenes. And because people think they underestimate them, they don't think much of them, their surplus status really becomes like a disguise where they can ferret out all these little clues. And it's obviously a statement about what Dorothy thinks about May Daniels' sentence, which is that as a surplus woman, she didn't really deserve to have a full investigation. So, it was so fun for me to solve the mystery, like really utilizing Dorothy Sayers' own books. And then, of course, the record as it still exists today, especially overwhelming abundance of newspaper articles. I mean, there are just so many, it's crazy. But so that's what the story is about, and the way in which these women come together, utilizing their myriad of talents and very divergent talents to
Right.
boot, to come together to try and resolve this murder. And they come up against some stuff about their own lives that they're not so desirous of sharing, particularly Dorothy. She has some pretty hefty secrets that she does not really can't let anyone know, because they would really ruin her life professionally, personally, you name it.
I
And so
know.
that's very much a part of the story as well.
She probably had the most unhappy life, personal life
Yeah.
of all of them, if you really think about it. I mean, Agatha had a couple, the whole
It's,
thing with Archie. But
yeah,
if
she's the
she'd
most special.
married to Archie, she never would have become Agatha Christie. So,
That's right.
in the end, I think it was. I'm going to recommend a book to you that I absolutely have fallen in love with by a woman named Lindsay Ashford, and it's called The Woman on the Orient Express. And
Ooh,
oh, listen, it's absolutely wonderful because what she does is she imagines Agatha getting on a train, heading off, and she runs into the woman, Catherine Woolley, who became the wife eventually of Leonard Woolley, and
yes.
Max Mallowan worked for them because that was his
Yes.
area of archaeology. And I mean,
Ooh.
it's a fabulous book. I've hand sold loads and loads of it because
Ooh, I have to look for that.
yeah, but I mean, one of the things I like about it is that it does emphasize the fact that Agatha would never have had the life she eventually led if, in fact, Archie hadn't, they never knew each other well enough. It
No,
was one of those hasty marriages and
yeah.
whatever. And, being shackled to Archie all her life would not really have
No.
worked out well.
No, I mean, sometimes the darkest times
Yeah.
are really a time for rebirth. And, I think she bristled against that marriage and what he was looking for, and vice versa. And she was trying to make it work until, of course, she didn't have a choice anymore because he was going to leave her for another woman. But that was really the best thing that could have ever happened to her. And while I don't think she planned to have all this unbelievable press attention over her disappearance, I really don't think she planned that. She did benefit from it, because if you didn't know her name before that, you knew her name afterwards. And
Yeah,
I
but I've always thought that was a genuine break on her part.
I
She's
agree with
a
you.
very emotional person, and her mother was. And I think the thing, it wasn't so much that she, you know, didn't want to let Archie go, is the social
Oh,
ramifications, the
okay.
shame of it. And she had a daughter that she was very protective of. I
Yeah,
think she had a genuine break. I mean,
I
I
do
have
too.
followed her. I wrote a chapter for Bloomsbury in one of their amazing academic books about all the times I have encountered or followed Agatha Christie. I mean, I've stayed in her room in S1 at the
Oh,
Cataract
I love
Hotel.
that.
I've been to the Para Palace Hotel. I have been to, her home when her daughter still lived there, and tour Greenways with Matthew Pritchard. I've been, to all these other things with her. And um, it just, I just think that none of that, and Harrogate, the Harrogate Crime Festival is actually takes place every year in July in the hotel where she was found at the end of this. So, she left a really large footprint, but I don't think anything about her personality would lead you to believe that she deliberately staged either for press attention or to punish Archie. I think she just genuinely had a breakdown.
I think she didn't know what to do with herself.
Yeah.
She was, and there was, it's hard for people to understand today the negative social connotations of a divorce. And the fact that you could actually lose your child. I mean, that the law was against you at that time for keeping your child. So there were a lot of things that I think, were so different about the time. And even if you tell people, it doesn't register in the same way. Much the same way Dorothy's secret, which I don't want to say what it is, but
Right.
her secret was big. And if that had come out, I mean, that was the kind of thing that today I don't think I wouldn't say wouldn't raise an eyebrow, but there definitely are some people who still would have raised an eyebrow at her secret, but it wouldn't have changed her life dramatically. In that time, in her social class in
Yeah.
particular, devastating. And so I think on some level that's still hard for people to appreciate what that is.
Well, it absolutely is. And it's far back, but it's not so far back. It's not Victorian or
Right.
whatever. And that leads me to a question, then we need to bring Patrick up. How far back in time are you willing to go to write some women's stories?
Oh, well, actually, my book that comes out this time next year, I
Ah,
go back to ancient Egypt. So
really?
I'll go back really, really far to tell a woman's story. I will go wherever she leads me, wherever I need to go, what continent, time period. I mean, gosh, I've written about 3 scientists. I've gone into the world of science, even though I'm nobody's scientist. Like, if I feel like this is the story I need to tell, I will do my utmost to follow them wherever that takes me.
Maybe I can push you towards Elizabeth Cavendish, who is my all-time favorite
Hey,
Tudor
she's on
woman.
my list thanks to you.
Oh, Lord, I think that her story is so, I mean, do you realize that the Cavendishes are still living today on the fortune that she created in the
That she built.
1500s? Yeah, I mean,
Think about
she
that.
supplied everybody. She was an orphan and she married up and married up. She, was in charge of Mary Queen of Scots. I mean, she produced two ducal, I mean, really, she's just an extraordinary woman. Elizabeth Shrewsbury was her name.
Oh,
And
no, she's on my list thanks to you based on our last conversation. And I have looked into her and don't think she's gone from my list.
oh, good. Well, I hope not,
She's
because I think,
very much on my list. I have so many women on there, and it's like, it's funny the way in which they surface. It's almost like at a certain point in time, I feel them like knocking at the door, like
yeah,
now's my time. It's now. Like I have felt these queens of crime for a while, but I wasn't sure how to enter their world. They weren't knocking quite yet.
got
And
it.
then when I found out about Dorothy's real life murder investigation, that was like the door was open. And very similarly with this ancient Egypt, I've always been fascinated with
Are you looking at Hatshepsut?
of course it's about
Oh,
Hatshepsut.
you and Fiona are going to have to get together.
I know. Can you believe it? I mean, because the books are done so long
I
beforehand.
know.
When I found out, I mean, hers is a fictional, she doesn't do straight up Hatshepsut. She does like a,
I know. We've had a long conversation and she's coming to see me again. So
oh,
I've
how
done
fun.
all of Fiona's books. We have,
I love her so much.
I
She
do
is
too.
such a beautiful person, just in general. But um, yeah, when I found out that it was a Hatshepsut-esque character, I was like, come on, nobody's ever even heard of Hatshepsut. And I've loved her for decades. Like when the Met did their big exhibit on her, I think it was early
Right.
2000s. That was like, I mean, I could have just died and gone to heaven right then and there, I mean, so for her story, I went where I needed to go, and I found my entry point, and it's really a story of the way in which Lady Evelyn Herbert, who you probably know, who was the
Yep.
daughter of Lord Carnarvon, and an amateur archaeologist herself, the way in which her story and the discovery of Tutankhamun's tomb intersects with unearthing the life of Hatshepsut.
Well, I think it'd be fun. Maybe I can get you and Fiona here together for
Oh
one.
my gosh, I would freaking love that. That would be so much fun. Oh my gosh. The
And I
seed
mean,
has been planted.
yeah, no, it'll be great because I have all my photographs of Egypt where I climbed down inside a tomb and came out and the whole bit. So it'll be great.
There
Well,
isn't an area of history that you are not, haven't had a personal encounter.
it's just
Great.
because I've lived so long, kiddo. That's the deal.
Oh, come
So,
on.
Patrick, I'm going to try to find the Dorothy Sayers book where she screws up the mushroom poisoning so everybody can not ask me about it later. While you come up and tell Marie who all has listened, I mean, who's got questions about her book. Let me remind you again that Marie has very kindly autographed copies for us, and they do come with a recipe card for the bee's knees cocktail, which
And
apparently,
let me just say that bee's knees cocktail, that is a drink that some of these women really loved.
oh
It
yeah,
is delicious. It's a classic drink from that time period. And I think I mentioned earlier, at a launch event we did on in my hometown on Saturday. I think some people had maybe enjoyed their bee's knees maybe a little bit too much. We had them available and they were maybe an overwhelming hit. Let's
you
just
must
put it
have
that
been in
way.
this weekly bookstore.
I did, yeah, yeah.
Yes, of course you have. I have a very good friend who has an estate right up the road there.
Oh,
So
no way. That's where I live. Yeah. So it was a lovely event. We actually, because I'm fortunate enough to have too many people to fit in that store. We have we have a wonderful movie theater and we kind of take over the place and it's super fun.
you're so
So
lucky you have one. You wouldn't believe the fact that Scottsdale does not have a theater.
come on.
I'm serious. We do our big events in a church, and it just ticks me off so that there are all these wonderful small towns and all that repurpose their movie theater. We have a wonderful one in downtown Phoenix called the Orpheum, but it's in downtown Phoenix. It's really not, and it's a little too big. But every once in a while, I think maybe what I'll do is I'll just, build a theater.
Come on.
Anyway,
What's the
Patrick,
next project?
right. Where are you? There
I'm
you
here.
are.
Yeah.
He's back with us.
Yeah. Let's see here.
Never gone away. He was just doing other things.
Thank goodness.
There aren't a whole lot of actual questions. People are really interested.
Wonderful.
There's some great comments. A lady says, I would come all the way from DC to Arizona to see Marie and Fiona.
Oh.
So that'd be cool.
All right. The date's
you-
coming your way.
Can you give us a taste of maybe some of the other women that are on your short list?
Oh, I
Who's
mean,
kind of bubbling up to the
I
surface?
can't say because some of them are already in the works and I'm not allowed to announce them.
Oh,
But let's just suffice it to say that there is no shortage of fabulous, important historical women to be written about. And sometimes people ask me, are you going to keep doing this forever? And I love to say that I'll stop doing this happily when all of the historic women's stories have been told, which as we all know will be never. So I will just keep on doing this. And I really do. I don't have a particular time period or area of the world or subject matter. It's really when I'm in research or someone recommends them, like Barbara just recommended Elizabeth Cavendish to me, I put them on my list and I start to research them and I come back to them. Like I said, it's almost like they come knocking at the door waiting.
I'm
I
sure
can't
they all,
describe it better than that. That sounds very mystical and it's
no,
not, but it's like that.
yeah,
do they all
well,
have misconceptions about them that the public holds when you're doing your research? Are you finding things that surprise you all the time?
Constantly, because I mean, let's be honest, a historical woman who's left an important legacy would necessarily be coming up against the views of the day, which were that a woman's life, skill set, circle is very conscripted. So any woman who's really left something behind that we are still beholden to today, those women have dealt with misconceptions, sometimes in as far as, violence against them, because they were trying to do something that was outside of what was expected of them. So yeah, unfortunately, that's part of the gig. If you're gonna leave something behind, you got to go through some stuff to get there.
it's very true. It's hard if you have a boring life. There's not a whole lot to, to talk about. I did a little research here. So the Dorothy Sayers book where she screwed up the mushroom poisoning is called The Documents in the Case, which I finally remembered. And Niall Marsh, I went back to look at her. It was Color Scheme and Dyed in the Wool, which are two of the books while she wrote in New Zealand. But the one where the A Surfeit of Lampreys also publishes Death of a Peer. This is the one where the crazy English guy, that guy's up in the tree and they're doing crossword puzzles. That's one of my totally favorite books. And
I mean,
then
that's the
years
craziest
later,
title.
yeah, well, Singing in the Shrouds is wonderful too. But When in Rome was actually quite a late book for her. It wasn't written till 1970. It was her 26th book.
Right.
Yeah. So
What
I
was
read,
the
I read her in real time, for most of my life because she started, I couldn't read her in 41 and all, but by the time she got to 1951, when I was 11, I started reading her in real time because my mom was a big fan. And she was pretty consistent. She produced a book, not every year, but,
Close.
for a really long time up until her last book was The Light Thickens in 1982.
1982, really?
Yeah. Yeah, she lived a long life. Yeah,
I
my
love
husband and I
it.
went to visit her home in New Zealand. It's outside of Christchurch. It's kind of and when she died, because she wasn't married, there's been this big debate. Christie's house, Greenways, her daughter Rosalind lived there, and Matthew Pritchard, her grandson. And when I visited, they were all still living there, not Christie because she was gone, but Rosalind and Matthew, who gave us a tour. But now it belongs to, I'm trying to think that, I think it belongs to the National Trust and it's now, there are outbuildings and all, so you can actually stay there like a hotel. But
Okay.
Niall's house, nobody could figure out what to do with it. And it was gradually crumbling. And there was a discussion about like selling her furniture and other things to help pay for the upkeep for the house. And we're going back to New Zealand next January, and I'm gonna look up before I go and try to figure out what happened to the Niall Marsh house.
It's still there. I mean, and it's operated as a museum. I don't know who owns it. I don't know if that's like if the state or there's some, trust that took it over, but it seems as though that sell-off, at least, I mean, who knows how extensive. You could sell a couple things, not everything. The big sell-off didn't happen. I
I
hope
hope
not.
not. Maybe they establish a trust using her royalties and stuff
Yeah.
because yeah, they
Good.
still are. It's hard. The one person missing in this entire conversation, one of my all-time favorite writers is Josephine Tey, but she was a bit later.
She was a bit later.
Yeah,
And
so
I mean, the reality is, like, according to the press, there were only 4 queens of crime. I played a little bit with the timing, but it had to be done because I love each and every one of them and their personalities. I couldn't leave anybody out.
it's your book. You can do whatever you wanted.
Fiction. It's fiction. They are inspired by these fabulous ladies, but they are not them. They are my Marie Benedict's version of these ladies, of what I think they might have. Yeah,
Patrick, anything else now that I've swanned in there and taken up more time?
I
Well,
love it.
it was the Allingham book you were thinking of called Look to the Lady,
Yes.
the Tower and all
You
that
are
stuff.
amazing. Look at you. I can't remember a book title to save my
I
life.
can only do it because of Patrick, who was able to
Well, I just looked, did a little searching.
exactly. That's why the chat function is so wonderful because, he's so used to me in my, old age going, he cocan fill it in. So it really is a great help when we're doing these. But
I wish
people like to know, after you mention something like
Yeah.
the mushroom poisoning, then if I don't answer it, we get like a zillion emails from people saying, okay.
What's that book?
Yeah.
Well, I hope that at least some people, if they read the book, they'll be inspired to revisit the women and their stories,
I hope so too. Well, fortunately, they're all still in print.
I know, thank
Well, I'm
goodness.
not sure about Allingham. I know
Some of
that
them are.
Anna Marsh is Felony and Mayhem, and Christie is still with HarperCollins and Sayers, I think, too.
Yeah.
And who am I missing? Baroness Orczy, Random House, I think. I think Vintage Crime is doing
Her stories.
The Old Man in the Corner. I don't think the Scarlet Pimpernel's ever gone out of print.
No, I mean, that's of all of the people, with the exception of Agatha, when I talk to audiences, everyone knows the Scarlet Pimpernel. They've no idea who Baroness Orczy is. They've never heard of her, but they know the Scarlet Pimpernel.
Leslie Howard and Merle Oberon, Be Still My Heart. I mean, I didn't get to see it when they made it because even I am not that old, but oh my God, it's just such a great movie. I know. And then they remade it with Anthony Andrews, and I'm trying to remember the actress, and it was equally wonderful.
And then it's been on the stage, on and off for a long, long time. I mean, it started out, I think, on the stage, and then she adapted it into books.
Right.
So, that's one that just kind of lives on. But I love each and every one of these ladies. I do. They're fabulous.
Well, you're right. You're right to do.
There's,
Did we miss anything else, Patrick?
well, I was going to ask, there's a question that came in. Are you going to co-write another book?
Yeah, actually, with Victoria, do they mean, or do they just mean in general?
They didn't specify, so just in
Okay.
general.
Sure. Well, Victoria Christopher Murray and I have a third book coming out a year from June, which I'm not allowed to discuss. I think it'll be a year from June. And I actually just launched a really fun, or I will be in April, middle school series that's about my women. We start off with the scientists, and it's called The Secrets of the Lovelace Academy. And because middle school readers do not want to read about a woman in her 30s, as their main character. So
No.
So I have a wonderful co-writer, Courtney Scheinmel, who's written tons of children's books, and we created the Lovelace Academy, which in our world was created by Ada Lovelace, who was the first famous mathematician. And they basically recruit the brightest scientist and math girls all around the country, no matter where they come from, whether it's an orphanage or whether the halls of a palace. And so that's kind of the setting. And one of the characters goes out into the world of Mileva Einstein, which is the first of my books. And the story goes from there. So it's a historical, I would say, adventure, but it's hopefully a great way to get younger readers interested in some of these amazing women in a way that's engaging rather than super boring.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that comes out, and then we're going to start with and then we'll do Hedy Lamarr after that, which will be a really fun one.
That was such a great book that you wrote about Hedy Lamarr. It never occurred to me that she was, like the radar inventor and all the rest of it. Wow.
Yeah, she was amazing. So it's a super fun, very different kind of adventure for me to tap into these women through this other kind of lens. And it really was an outgrowth of so many readers asking me if I'd ever write these stories for younger readers. And I couldn't figure out how to do it for a while. And that is why I have a co-writer, because that's her thing. That's what she does. And so we do it together.
Wonderful. I
Yeah.
love it. That's a wonderful idea. But I think part of the reason we're in the mess we're in so many ways is lack of education and lack of critical thinking and no sense of history. And so anything that we can do to promote those with younger people, I think it's just a brilliant idea. So good for you.
Thank you. Thank you. It's been fun. It really has. It's been an enjoyable experience.
Anything else, Patrick?
I think, let me just go check Facebook here. No, I think that's about it.
Well, this has been absolutely amazing. I mean, what a delight. Again, a delight.
Thank you. I've enjoyed it enormously myself. I will send you the links to the YouTube, the Facebook, and the audio, which you can then, when you're done with your tour, it becomes a permanent book tour. So you can post them on your website and all the rest of it. That'll be fun. So you get the recipe card. You two can make the bee's knees, and then you can read the book together. Perfect. Right. So thank you very much, Marie, for giving up this time.